In December 1975, a 24-year-old switched on a toaster-sized box. It needed 23 seconds to save a single photo. The image came out blurry, black and white, barely there. He showed his bosses. They shrugged and said, "Don't tell anyone." That toaster was the world's first digital camera, built inside a film company. It had just started killing an empire. The empire would take 37 years to fall. I am Archie. I keep the files nobody wants reopened. This one is stamped file number 5, Eastman Kodak. No villain hides in here, no con man, no fraud, no lie. Just a giant that saw the future clearly and could not bring itself to build it. Open it with me. The story starts in 1888 with a man named George Eastman. He built a camera so simple that anyone could use it and wrapped it in one perfect promise. You press the button, we do the rest. You snapped your photos, mailed the whole camera back, and Kodak returned your prints and fresh film. It was genius, because the money was never in the camera, the money was in the film. Kodak was not really a camera company. It was a razor and blades business, and film was the blade. The camera you bought once, the film you bought forever, roll after roll, chemical after chemical, print after print. Some analysts put the profit on that film near 70%. Every wedding, every birthday, every holiday paid Kodak again and again. They even gave the world a phrase for it, a Kodak moment. When something mattered, you reached for their film. By 1976, that grip was total. Roughly 9 of every 10 rolls of film sold in America were Kodak. They held about 85% of the camera market too. Not the leader, almost the only choice. Having no rival means 2 things. You are all-powerful, and nobody left will ever tell you the truth. Then, inside their own labs, the future arrived early. In 1975, a young Kodak engineer named Stephen Sasson built something strange, a camera with no film at all. It weighed 8 pounds, captured 1/100th of a megapixel, and saved each image onto a cassette tape. It was the world's first digital camera, and it was born in the one company with the most to lose. 6 years later, in 1981, Kodak's own researchers studied the threat and reached a chilling answer. Digital would one day replace film, and they had about 10 years to prepare. They were not blind. They wrote their own warning. Then they filed it away. Kodak had already seen its own ending. It just decided there was still plenty of time. When Sasson showed his invention to management, he later recalled their reaction. "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." They were convinced, he said, that no one would ever want to look at their pictures on a television set. It is easy to call that blindness. It was not. Think it through. A digital camera breaks the golden rule. You buy it once. No film, no chemicals, no prints, no reason to ever pay Kodak again. Their own engineers had handed them a machine that erased their best business. So the real question inside Kodak was never how do we sell this? It was how much of ourselves does this destroy? Every instinct that built the empire now whispered, slow down. And for a while that caution even looked wise, because here is what almost everyone gets wrong. Kodak did not refuse digital. In 2004 and 2005, Kodak was the #1 seller of digital cameras in America. #1. They had even built the first commercial digital SLR back in 1991. The problem was never courage. It was math. Every digital camera they sold in 2001 reportedly lost them about $60. They had won the market and were losing money on every single sale. In April 2004, after 74 years, Kodak was dropped from the Dow Jones, the club of America's biggest companies. The message was blunt. Wall Street had stopped believing. For a while, one thing kept the lights on: patents. All those digital inventions from the 1970s and 80s earned Kodak royalties, around $3 billion between 2003 and 2010. Then the tenants stopped paying. By 2011, that royalty income had collapsed to $98 million. The landlord was about to lose the building. Across the ocean, a rival showed another path. Fujifilm sold film too. But when the storm came, Fuji dug into its own chemistry, the science hidden inside film, and turned it into skincare and medicine. The same knowledge, aimed somewhere new. Kodak had the same warning and the same skill. It simply could not turn the ship the same way. Then, in 2007, the ground moved again. A phone arrived with a camera built in. Soon, nobody needed a cheap camera at all. The camera lived in your pocket. Kodak's last foothold was slipping. The company that owned 9 of every 10 rolls of film had run out of road. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for bankruptcy protection. The numbers told the whole story. About $5 billion in assets against $6.5 billion in debts. A giant more than a century old now owed more than it owned, closing its doors on a negative balance. The pain landed hardest in one place, Rochester, New York, Kodak's hometown. At its peak, Kodak employed more than 140,000 people worldwide. In Rochester alone, 60,000. For generations, this was the company town, where a Kodak paycheck raised the children and paid the mortgage. By 2024, Kodak's entire workforce had shrunk to around 4,000. A city built on one company watched that company nearly vanish. Then came the cruelest sale of all. In late 2012, Kodak sold about 1,100 of its digital patents. It had hoped for $2 billion, maybe more. It got $525 million. And the buyers? A group led by Apple and Google, the very companies that had conquered the digital world Kodak dreamed up first. They bought the future back from its inventor for a fraction of its worth. Kodak crawled out of bankruptcy in 2013, shrunk down to commercial printing. Then, in 2020, it tried a stranger turn still. During the pandemic, the US government offered Kodak a $765 million loan to start making drug ingredients. The stock exploded from under $3 to $60 in just 2 days. But questions swirled around trades made right before the news, and regulators paused the deal. Later, government investigators cleared Kodak and its leaders of any wrongdoing. 2 outsiders, with no ties to the company, were charged with insider trading instead, and the loan was never actually paid out. Kodak was still hunting for a future, and still not finding one. There is one last echo in this file. George Eastman, the founder, died in 1932. He left a short note behind. "My work is done. Why wait?" Nearly a century later, the company that carried his name faced its own hardest question, and twice could not decide in time. So we arrive back where we began, with a warning. In August 2025, Kodak told regulators in an official filing that recent conditions raised substantial doubt about its ability to continue as a going concern. A 133-year-old company admitting on paper that it might not make it, the same warning it first heard in 1981 from its own people. But this file does not close in the dark. At that very moment, film was coming back. A new generation had fallen in love with it, and Kodak's film orders were climbing. The company's chief says that when he took over in 2019, director Christopher Nolan called and urged him, "Do not turn this off." By 2026, Kodak's profits were rising, and its stock had roughly doubled in a year. The crisis is not over, but the ship for now is still afloat. Here is the lesson from file number 5. The warning almost always comes early. It came in 1981, tucked in a drawer. It came again in 2025, this time on the record. Seeing the future is the easy part. Surviving it means being willing to burn down your best business before a stranger burns it down for you. Kodak saw everything coming and flinched. Close the file. Somewhere on the shelf, another giant is filing away its own best warning. I'll keep the light on.